Were outside the Arizona hearing on Monday. They share their thoughts about what's at stake in this election. Multiple election lawsuits go after a group funded by Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. They accuse it of enabling local elections to violate the Constitution. Some Trump supporters will be on the road for the next 2 weeks, traveling the East Coast to show support for the president and demand a fair election. Members of Arizona's Republican state legislature held an election integrity hearing yesterday. The panel of lawmakers was joined by Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis from the Trump campaign. The hearing had witness testimony and questioning about allegations of widespread voting fraud. NTD's Christina Kim gives us the overview.
The hearing began at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Rudy Giuliani spoke first, saying that the legislature of Arizona has complete and absolute power to regulate the selection of electors in a presidential election.
Your political career is worth losing if you can save the right to vote in America. In fact, I may get you it. Because at times in our history, certain men and women have stepped forward and lost their political career to give us the rights that we have.
Giuliani added that the Supreme Court ruled that state houses and senates can reclaim the power to name electors. Ellis said when the voice of the people is corrupted through fraud, it is the duty and obligation of the legislature to prevent false results from being certified. But Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, a Democrat, said she has seen no evidence of irregularities or fraud that would overturn the results of the election. Matt Brainerd is the executive director of Look Ahead America and the former data chief and strategist for Trump for president. He spoke of his findings on early absentee votes from Maricopa County. He said 44% of people in this group never requested absentee ballots, but received one anyway. Brainerd said he will update his findings as the other counties in Arizona release their data. Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai spoke next. He holds 4 degrees from MIT, is a Fulbright scholar, and a world-renowned systems scientist, inventor, and engineer. Ayyadurai looked at the official data from Arizona Secretary of State and created a graph showing the cumulative votes for Biden and Trump. Using those results, he went through multiple computer simulations that used different combinations of vote allocations from different political parties that could reproduce what happened on election night. After many different combinations of votes, one scenario matched the actual curves on election night almost perfectly. In this scenario, Biden got 130% of votes from Democrats, and Trump got negative 30% of votes from Democrats.
I find it highly implausible because this means that Mr. Biden got 130% of Democrat voters and negative 30%, and President Trump got negative 30%. So how?
Ayyadurai said there are some ways these results could have occurred. One is that there's a demographic within independent voters who voted for Biden that the model didn't account for. Another possibility is if Biden's votes were multiplied by 1.3, meaning each vote for Biden actually became 1.3 reported votes, and Trump's votes were reduced by 0.3 votes. He said a combination of these two things could have happened and noted he will continue to analyze the situation. Christina Kim, NTD News.
During the hearing, Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs certified the state's election results. She said every Arizona voter should know that they can stand proud that this election was conducted with transparency, accuracy, and fairness in accordance with Arizona's laws and elections procedures, despite numerous unfounded claims to the contrary. President Trump on Monday said the 2020 election was rigged. He accused Democrats of playing games on a scale never seen before, as he called into a hearing on Arizona's election.
The election integrity hearing held in Arizona on Monday received a phone call from the president.
Well, thank you very much. I've been watching the hearings, and they're fascinating, incredible, and I want to just thank all of you.
He called the 2020 election the greatest scam ever perpetrated on our country.
I know that we won Arizona, and we won Michigan, and we won Georgia, and we won Pennsylvania, and we won Wisconsin. But what they did is they played games, and games like nobody's ever seen before. This is the first time Republicans or first time anyone has fought back.
Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and Jenna Ellis facilitated the call as members of the Arizona legislature, witnesses, and attendees of the hearing listened. During the call, President Trump accused Republican Arizona Governor Doug Ducey of rushing the certification process amid voter fraud allegations.
He just rushed to sign certificates so that Kelly gets into the Senate as soon as possible. What's that all about?
Ducey said on Monday that he would sign the certification right away so that Senator-elect Mark Kelly, a Democrat, could be sworn in as swiftly as possible. The president questioned why Ducey would sign when there are hearings taking place and huge allegations of corruption and fraud. President Trump said he wouldn't relent regarding this year's election, saying, "We're gonna win this thing. We're not giving up ever." Ducey defended his state's election system on Twitter. In a statement, he said, "In Arizona, we have some of the strongest election laws in the country." He wrote, "We've got ID at the polls. We review every signature, every single one, on early ballots, by hand, unlike other states that use computers, prohibitions on ballot harvesting, and bipartisan poll observers."
GOP Chairwoman Linda Brickman of Maricopa County says she personally witnessed Dominion machines switch votes to Joe Biden. She says herself and others who saw this were later threatened not to talk about it.
No longer here.
Maricopa County GOP Chairwoman Linda Brickman testified before members of the Arizona State Legislature. She said she personally observed votes for President Trump being tallied as votes for Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden by Dominion machines.
I observed with my Democratic partner the preparation of a new ballot since the original one was soiled or wouldn't go through the tabulators.
Brickman is a veteran county elections worker and the GOP head of one of the country's largest counties. Her testimony was submitted in a sworn affidavit under penalty of perjury.
I read her a Trump Republican ballot, and as soon as she entered it into the system, the ballot defaulted on the screen to a Biden Democratic ballot.
She remarked that when she reported the issue to election supervisors, others in the room also commented that they had witnessed the same manipulation. Brickman says she witnessed votes shift from Trump to Biden more than once when input into Dominion machines. She alleged that she was later threatened by election supervisors at the Maricopa County Tabulation and Election Center for speaking out about what she saw. She told the hearing many people were threatened.
I'm here because I think this is our duty to speak the truth and hear the truth.
Dominion CEO John Poulos this week in the Wall Street Journal denied all allegations against the company. Brickman alleges she also observed a number of other irregularities, like failure to correctly match signatures.
Signature verification standards were constantly being lowered by supervisors in order to move more quickly and process the higher amount of early and mail-in ballots from the 15 points of similarities reduced to a minimum of 3. Lowered to 1, and ultimately none.
Brickman recalled that she was told to just pass each signature verification through. She questioned the integrity of what she reportedly observed, stating this is not the way an election should be run. She also said ballots were passed through even though signatures on the envelope did not match the signature or even the name on the ballot. She says she witnessed different ballots allegedly showing the same handwriting on the envelopes.
During a public hearing, lawmakers called for support of a resolution that would delay the release of Arizona's electoral college votes for the presidential election. The hearing was hosted by Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis. Witnesses and experts presented testimony on the state's mishandling of the November 3rd general election. Witnesses who worked at the polls noticed improper procedures in vote handling, and experts spoke about the hackability of voting machines. Others examined the possibilities of how votes were electronically manipulated to ensure a win for Joe Biden. Lawmakers are urging their colleagues to withhold the state's 11 electoral college votes. Arizona State Congressman Mark Finchem told reporters that they hope to have a resolution within the next 24 to 48 hours. A cybersecurity expert told the hearing that the Democratic Party of Pima County allegedly embedded 35,000 fake votes for every Democratic candidate. He previously testified at a Pennsylvania hearing.
up these machines.
Cybersecurity expert and retired Army Colonel Phil Waldron testified in front of members of the Arizona State Legislature on Monday. Colonel Waldron presented an analysis of data that shows a vote spike on Election Day, shortly after counting started.
Arizona was a little bit different. It had a pretty strong rise right up at the front, the first part of voting day, whereas the other states, and I can show you those, have a gradual increase in votes. But this injection spike at 8:06:40 p.m., and this is adjusted from Zulu time, so this is 143,100 votes that were injected. That was in excess of what the machines could have processed.
He presented an email sent on November 10th from an anonymous individual claiming to have witnessed a detailed plan to embed 35,000 fraud votes to each Democrat candidate's total votes while at a Pima County Democratic Party meeting in September. The source sent the email to the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice and all members of the Arizona legislature.
It says that please be advised that Pima County Recorder and the Democratic Party added fraud votes in the initial count to the vote by mail totals released at 8 p.m. on November 3rd, 2020. So this coincides with what we observed in the data analytics at that spike. We weren't aware of this until after the fact. So there were approximately 35,000 fraud votes added to each Democratic candidate's vote totals.
According to this individual, who appeared to be an IT specialist in Pima County, the 35,000 votes were embedded in a spread-configured distribution and auto-adjusted to the real voter turnout. The fraud votes applied to both local and federal election candidates.
They were distributed based on the voter turnout carefully so they wouldn't look suspicious.
That's correct. They move the algorithms around to different precincts until they get the aggregate number that they want and need, and then they shift the algorithms to other precincts.
Did the Democratic candidates who got the benefit of those 35,000 false votes include Biden and Harris?
According to this email, it was all local and federal races.
So if that were true, then the result of the election is totally opposite the one that they're so anxious to certify.
Colonel Waldron clarified that he hopes this anonymous individual would come forward and issue it as an affidavit. But as of now, the state legislature has been unable to identify the individual. He added that this allegation can potentially be proven through a full forensic audit of the machines used in Pima County.
Congressman Paul Gosar, alongside Arizona lawmakers, gave us their reactions to the hearing. For one, Gosar says this is a bipartisan issue and every lawmaker should be on guard.
At a press conference during the Arizona election hearing, Republican Arizona Congressman Paul Gosar says this election issue should concern everyone.
This is not even a partisan issue. This is a bipartisan issue. In fact, one of my colleagues, a very liberal member from Maryland, Jamie Raskin, sits on government oversight, has actually introduced legislation because he was so concerned about the corruptibility in the 2016 election in regards to Russia. Bingo! So we ought to be doing this across the board for transparency to the American public.
Mark Fincham, a Republican Arizona state representative, says the problem is all about the chain of custody of ballots.
Cannot emphasize that enough. We do not have fraud countermeasures. We have people who have got too many fingers on those ballots. We have equipment that is made by a foreign country that is 100% corruptible. And we've got a duplicitous organization, that would be our elected officials, who are permitting the sequestration of that instead of showing transparency and say, you know what, you don't have to give us a subpoena, you don't have to impound the machines. Tell you what, pick one, let's do a forensic audit. All I'm hearing is crickets, and that is unacceptable.
Sonny Borelli, an Arizona state Republican senator, pointed out how House Speaker Nancy Pelosi once said in 2017 that the election had been hijacked and hashtagged follow the facts. But now he says they want to shove the facts under the carpet. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
During the Arizona hearing, a cybersecurity expert told the panel that the Department of Homeland Security analyzed their research on U.S. voting system vulnerabilities. He claims that after analyzing the data, DHS determined the software had multiple vulnerabilities back in August.
Phil Waldron, a cybersecurity expert and retired Army colonel who specialized in information warfare, testified at the Arizona public hearing before GOP legislators. Waldron said he shared his team's extensive research into U.S. voting systems vulnerabilities with local Texas DHS personnel months before the election. Some of the vulnerabilities include the machines being connected to the internet and malware.
When I started working on this project in August, I called them up and said, you guys have got to come out and look at it. They did. They spent an initial 3 hours going through this data. At the end of that, one of them said, I think I need to go outside and throw up.
He said that DHS personnel also had multiple follow-ups and received over 600 gigabytes of data that had been accumulated over time.
Our team provided them over 200 gigabytes of confirmatory data, and they analyzed that. After they analyzed, there was a passive scan done. They conducted a limited scan and determined that there were vulnerabilities. They held numerous meetings with their folks, the CISA cyber side, and the INA, which is the Intelligence Assessment Division.
He also claimed he was told by local DHS personnel that members of CISA's election division would not participate in the internal meetings or briefings about the material his team provided. One of the GOP legislators noted that Chris Krebs, the former director of CISA, stated that the 2020 election was the most secure in history.
He stated, we're not connected to the internet. He stated no votes leave this country. This is all things he's stated publicly.
It's all on the CISA website, correct?
Right. So are you willing to say under oath that you have seen the connection to the internet? You have seen it go offshore to Germany, Frankfurt. Are these things that you have personally seen and can say that is not true?
Our white hat hackers, yes, they have that traffic in the packets.
So why would he make that kind of comment, do you think?
Either not knowing, believing the myth, or not wanting the truth to be known.
When Krebs was director of CISA, the agency, along with other members of the Election Infrastructure Government Coordinating Council, released a joint statement declaring the election as the most secure in American history. It stated there is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. The agency failed to mention that Dominion as well as Smartmatic are members of the council. Krebs was fired by President Trump earlier this month after the statement was released.
NTD live-streamed Monday's Arizona election hearing. Rally-goers watched it on a big screen outside the building. We caught up with a couple of them to hear what they have to say.
Trump supporters gathered outside the Arizona hearing on Monday. One rally-goer said he was happy NTD was live-streaming the hearing so people can get all the information. We asked him how important getting access to the truth is right now.
Oh my God! I mean, if they don't fix this, if they don't figure it out, we'll never have another legal election at all. It'll never happen again.
He says whoever took part in election fraud needs to be held accountable, and everything needs to be transparent.
It needs to be shown to the American people and to the world that we will back our elections and our elections are truthful.
We also spoke to Dr. Cordy Williams, who founded 1776 Forever Free. He says he started it to bring people together under the Constitution and to help protect Americans' freedom. He says the hearing is a step in the right direction.
I think it's amazing. I think it's needed. Now the question is how the legislature is going to respond and whether they're going to respond out of some political pork barreling, do what's right for the governor or their buddy, or whether they're going to respond to what the voice of patriots is saying. And what the Voice of Patriots and the evidence is saying is this was a fraudulent election.
He says we're fighting communism within our own government and that it's no longer about Democrats versus Republicans.
What have we become as a country when we're almost like the book burning that occurred in World War II, where there's one narrative out there. Every American, whether they're liberal or Democrat, it's not liberalism anymore. It's either you're American or you're not. And every American out there needs to be scared for their life, their family, and what the future holds.
He says some election and government officials seem to be okay with fraudulent elections, and he is concerned about the direction the country is headed in.
And today they got more than 200.
Rally-goers in Arizona expressed their gratitude towards NTD for reporting on the hearing and bringing the truth to a wider audience.
That's going to be these two lovely people over here in the corner. NTD.
A Mark Zuckerberg-funded group is in the spotlight in election-related court cases. The group is accused of taking part in violating the Constitution in battleground states.
Post-election lawsuits accuse a group funded by Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg of helping violate the Constitution in key battleground states. Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan committed $400 million to the Center for Tech and Civic Life. The nonprofit gave money to over 2,500 local election offices across the country. According to lawsuits filed by the Thomas More Foundation's MSTAT project, the group gave over $6 million to officials in Fulton County, Georgia, and to 5 cities in Wisconsin. The Wisconsin filing says state law doesn't allow cities and counties to take in millions of dollars from a wealthy partisan actor like Zuckerberg. The Georgia filing says the money was used to pay ballot harvesters and political activists to manage ballots. It also said the money was used to consolidate counting centers in urban areas to move hundreds of thousands of questionable ballots in secrecy without legally required bipartisan observation. Amistad project director Phil Klein told the Epoch Times that in Pennsylvania, the money led to a 2-tiered system. He said Democrat strongholds allowed voters to fix ballots against state law, but Republican areas did not because they refused to lie and because they didn't have resources or Zuckerberg funding. Klein said the center funded ballot boxes that were densely placed in a Philadelphia county, but few were sent to counties that Trump won. He also said they consolidated polling places in a way that disenfranchised Republican strongholds, violating the Equal Protection Clause. Klein says similar issues came up in other states, including Michigan.
Attorney Sidney Powell says an unknown person removed a Dominion voting system server from a recount center in Fulton County, Georgia, in the midst of her voter fraud lawsuits. She said on Fox that someone went down to the location where the voting machines were, claimed there was a software glitch, and apparently left with the missing server. Powell said the alleged removal took place when her team was seeking a temporary restraining order against the resetting, wiping, or altering of any of the Dominion machines. Dominion's software and hardware features prominently in the 2 election-related lawsuits filed by Powell in Georgia and Michigan. The lawsuits claim that the software is vulnerable to manipulation that led to altered vote totals in the November election, and that upcoming runoff elections are also vulnerable. Pennsylvania lawmakers have formally introduced a bill to dispute the election results. They're asking the state to retract its certification of the results.
Republican state lawmakers in Pennsylvania on Monday introduced a resolution to dispute the results of the 2020 election. The bill says that state officials have infringed upon the state legislature's authority by unlawfully changing election rules. The resolution calls on the Secretary of State to withdraw the premature certification, declare the election to be in dispute, and urge Congress to declare the selection of presidential electors in dispute. This, as one of the state's Republican senators said on Friday that the GOP-controlled state legislature will make a bid to reclaim its power to appoint the state's electors to the Electoral College. The bill has been co-sponsored by 41 lawmakers. It requires 102 votes to pass. The state has 109 Republicans in the House. The resolution listed 3 illegal actions by state officials and the state courts. That includes the state Supreme Court extending the deadline of accepting mail-in ballots, its ruling that signatures on mail-in ballots don't need to be verified, and the Secretary of State's encouraging certain counties to notify party and candidate representatives of mail-in voters whose ballots contained defects. All of the changes are contrary to the Pennsylvania Election Code, which forbids the counting of defective mail-in ballots. The resolution also lists a variety of election irregularities and potential fraud that includes the issues brought up by witnesses during the Senate hearing last week. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Democrat State Assemblywoman Christy Smith conceded defeat in a tight congressional race in California's 25th district, it handling Congressman Mike Garcia a bitterly fought win. Smith sought to unseat Republican incumbent Garcia, but lost by 333 votes. Garcia called the battle to retain his congressional seat tough. After winning, he said he would push to get federal virus relief funds to individuals and small businesses. The race remained close. Smith was ahead at one point, but Garcia later passed her and kept a narrow lead. Smith said that despite ballot reviews and vote curing, she still came up short. Garcia also beat Smith in May in a special election to fill the same House seat left vacant by former Democrat Congresswoman Katie Hill. More Trump supporters are coming together to address their concern about ensuring a fair election. Aside from the Stop the Steal rallies nationwide, one group will be hitting the road for 2 weeks. They told NTD about what brings them together.
A group of Trump supporters kicked off a bus tour in Florida on Sunday. Called March for Trump, the group plans to show their support for the president by traveling to 18 states, including battleground states like Georgia and Pennsylvania. One of the event organizers, Amy Kramer, said the presidential race is not over.
Regardless of what the mainstream media and the Democrats would like you to believe, it's not over. The people choose the president of the United States, not the media, and we're mad as hell about it. They have, for 4 years, they've tried to overthrow this president, and now they are trying to steal an election, and we're not going to stand for it. And so we are taken to the streets.
The group's final destination is Washington, D.C., where they plan to have a march for Trump on December 12th.
We want the people to come out and see that, the people are mad, that come stand with us and let our president know we support you, we have your back, and we're not going to let this election be stolen.
A veteran at the kickoff said having a fair election transcends political parties.
Whether you're Republican or Democrat has nothing to do with it. What has to do with it is that your vote may not have counted. We may have been stolen. This election may have been taken away.
Like many here, he thinks there should be an investigation to find out whether there was any election fraud.
I take my right to vote very seriously, and to think for 1 minute that my vote may have been absconded by cheating in the ballot machines and people behind those machines, it scares me.
A business owner from Florida is in one of the Stop the Steal rallies on Facebook. She believes she's censored.
Do we live in communist China? I know they want us to. That's what's going to happen if Biden takes over. But we're fighting for this. We're fighting for this. We're not going to let it happen.
Also at the kickoff is a Floridian who immigrated from China over 2 decades ago. She said she stands for Trump because she wants to deter the influence of communism in the United States.
We love America. We love Trump. So we have to stand up for this country. We want freedom. We don't want the United States to turn into China, where the government controls everything.
A veteran said this could be the last fight for a fair election.
If we don't fix it now, we will never, in the future, be able to have an honest election.
The March for Trump group plans to stop by Wilmington, North Carolina this Tuesday. Reporting by Kevin Jia and Juliet Song, NTD News.
And in Trenton, New Jersey, a group of Trump supporters gathered in the state's capital as part of the Stop the Steal movement. Some Trump supporters there said the outcome of the election will now be up to the courts, while one attendee told us what he fears most for the U.S.
New Jersey Trump supporters gathered in Trenton, the state's capital, to take a stand against alleged voter fraud. Events like these are also taking place in other states. A former Air Force pilot said he wants transparency.
I just want an honest election. I want the right man in the office, and I want our voice heard. And in my opinion, I don't think the election was done honestly because of some of the things that I've seen in the news. So I wanted all these things brought to the government, to the court, and I will respect whatever the court decides, but we need to have it looked at.
Another participant we talked to is an attorney working in New Jersey. He said he thinks Trump will win the election.
I think what happens is now a lot of the evidence and the lawsuits are coming out publicly. So it's not just people saying the election has been taken. Now they're actually presenting evidence. This is what happened. Take a look at this. And once that evidence comes out, then we hope that the courts have to make a decision. And not just the courts, but elected officials in these states where we need to switch.
Experts and analysts said that if Joe Biden were to win the election, efforts made by the Trump administration to hold the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, responsible would be undone. Some also pointed out that the CCP would have more opportunity to expand its influence in the West. A nurse who left communist Ukraine when she was 16 said she's afraid this might come true.
I see this influence of CCP coming to America, and I never thought I would see that, and that is very scary. And I have kids. I want them to grow up free. And I see what they did to Hong Kong. I see what they're trying to do to Taiwan, and I see what they're trying to do to America. And I will do anything to prevent that.
Bolton News said Americans need to be educated on communism and to fight tooth and nail against it to make sure it doesn't emerge in the U.S.
Up next, nearly 1/3 of small businesses in New York and New Jersey are still closed. We hear from some of the store's owners about their situation. That and more when we return.
What does it mean to devote your life to the truth? Does it mean investigating communist subversion here in America? Does it mean exposing the deadly fentanyl crisis in the Midwest? We're spending late nights and covering deep government corruption. Does it mean persevering over 20 years, even after 4 masked men set one of our printing presses on fire last year? Because at a time when America's traditional values are under attack, it's the responsibility of righteous journalists to uphold truth and tradition.
Nearly 1/3 of small businesses in New York and New Jersey are still closed. That's since shuttering in January.
At the height of the pandemic-related lockdowns in April, over half of the small businesses in the Empire State shut their doors. While a significant proportion have since reopened, most are still struggling to keep their business running.
Especially November month of December is the biggest month of the year. Right now you're not doing any business, nothing. Dead.
Many factors are at play, making this time especially difficult. While tourists are not flocking to the city this year, locals are mostly still steering clear. And many have transitioned to working from home.
You know, it's very hard, to be honest. Like, it's highly impossible. We never thought, in my experience from almost 15 years, I never had this kind of a situation.
But some businesses in other states have it worse. Nearly half of small businesses in Washington, D.C. remain closed compared to January. Over 40% in Alaska and almost 39% in New Mexico.
New York City is changing its policy on schools. They are going to reopen soon, but students have to meet certain criteria before they can come in.
New York City's public schools will begin to reopen for in-person learning on December 7th, starting with elementary schools for students whose parents agree to a weekly testing regimen for the novel coronavirus, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced on Sunday. The nation's largest school system closed less than 2 weeks ago after the citywide rate of coronavirus tests coming back positive exceeded the 3% benchmark agreed to by the mayor and the teachers union. De Blasio also told reporters that the 3% benchmark was now being scrapped and pointed to research that shows young children appear to be less vulnerable to COVID-19. On Sunday, the city's 7-day rolling average of positive tests was 3.9%, de Blasio said. New York City was one of the few jurisdictions in the U.S. to attempt to reopen schools in the fall, but it closed classrooms back down in mid-November, less than 8 weeks after they had begun to offer in-class lessons. Pre-kindergarten classes will also reopen December 7th. De Blasio said middle and high schools would reopen at later dates that had not yet been set.
New York City is decorated with unique architecture, but despite objections from locals, some of the structures must occasionally make way for new building projects.
The MetLife Sky Bridge connects the Metropolitan Life buildings next to Madison Square Park in Manhattan's Flatiron District. It's located 12 stories above the ground and offers an unusual sight for tourists and residents alike. The construction of the two buildings connected by the bridge started in 1928. Now, after almost a century, the bridge has to go.
A lot of neighborhoods, they change, but I think part of what makes this one unique is definitely the architecture that's been here for, decades.
The bridge is being removed because the buildings were sold to developer SL Green. The company will add a new glass tower next to the clock tower.
Zoning laws require the bridge to be removed if the new tower is to be built. Unlike the clock tower here on Madison Avenue, the bridge is not a landmark, which is why it has to go.
When I look at that bridge has always caught my eye, and people stop by, look at it, so it was probably a mistake not to make it a landmark, and I'm sorry it's going.
He added that old New York architecture should be preserved rather than replaced. The new tower is expected to be finished in 2024.
Coming up, the U.S. Treasury imposing sanctions on a Chinese company operating in Venezuela. The U.S. says the company is helping the Maduro regime stifle opposition. And concerns about surveillance gear in South Korea. The equipment comes from China and is found to have malicious code, prompting questions about just where the data is being sent. That and more when we return.
Is deep-sea fish oil really healthy? Due to pollution in the oceans, most fish contain heavy metal elements and radioactive substances. That's why it's so important to choose a pure source of omega-3. Puritang Green Vegetable Omega-3 is made from purslane and perilla seeds, which are rich in nutrients and minerals, especially vitamins A, D, E, calcium, and iron. With natural processing and no harmful chemical additives, it has more than 90% concentration of omegas 3, 6, 7, and 9. It effectively improves brain power and is beneficial to the heart's health. Puritang Omega-3 does not smell of fish and contains no pollutants, so both adults and children can safely and easily consume it over a long period of time. Puritang Green Vegetable Omega-3. Eat 2 a day and you'll feel brand new.
The U.S. is imposing sanctions on another Chinese firm. It's accused of supporting Venezuela's socialist dictator's efforts to undermine democracy. The Treasury Department said that China National Electronics Import-Export Corporation supported the leftist regime of Nicolas Maduro in its efforts to restrict internet service and conduct digital surveillance and cyber operations against political opponents. Washington in January 2019 recognized Venezuelan opposition politician Juan Guaido as the nation's rightful leader. Maduro's 2018 re-election is widely described as fraudulent. government. Venezuelans have said for years that their computers and phones cannot access certain websites linked to the opposition or some local news agencies that openly criticize the government. The Treasury said the Chinese company had been supporting the Maduro regime since 2017. China's surveillance arm could be reaching into South Korea. The suspicions come after monitoring cameras from a Chinese company were found to have malicious code. The discovery triggered questions about where exactly the data is headed. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
Now we turn to South Korea. A lawmaker, Hai Tai-kwon, quoted the country's defense ministry last week about malicious codes found in surveillance equipment delivered by a Chinese company. This, according to South Korean newspaper Chosun Ilbo. The over 200 surveillance cameras were supposed to be used for military purposes in South Korea. When set up, they could potentially send military secrets to China. Fortunately, the South Korean military discovered it before it's too late. According to Hai Tai-kwon, this is the first time that malicious codes have been discovered from surveillance equipment of the South Korean military. The South Korean military confirmed the Chinese company could freely change the storage path of images captured by the equipment and store them somewhere else. The remote control network function of the equipment was also turned on, meaning outside actors could interfere with surveillance. Now we turn to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance between 30 European and North American countries. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on Monday said China's rise could present an important opportunity for our economies, but posed important challenges to our security.
China is investing massively in new weapons. It is coming closer to us from the Arctic to Africa and by investing in our infrastructure.
Stoltenberg said China is not NATO's adversary, but the authors of a report called NATO 2030 calls on allies to think harder about how to handle China's military rise.
China does not share our values. It does not respect fundamental human rights and tries to intimidate other countries. We must address this together, both as NATO allies and as a community of like-minded countries.
The report is set to be published on Tuesday. It contains about 140 proposals on reforming the Atlantic Alliance. And in other China-Australia news, China's Ministry of Commerce imposed tariffs of up to more than 200% on Australian wine exports on Saturday. Beijing claims to have evidence of Australian wine dumping, which it says has allegedly caused actual damage to its local market. Dumping occurs when a country exports a product at a lower price than the normal market rate, something often considered an unfair trade practice. In an ABC interview over the weekend, Australian Federal Trade Minister Simon Birmingham is calling on the CCP to speak plainly and clearly about what it is that is driving this consistent trend of actions that are disrupting Australia's trade. He added, these types of actions don't just hurt Australian businesses, they hurt their Chinese counterparts as well. They undermine confidence in the global economy, and that's not good for the world's recovery from COVID. Australian Cabinet Minister Dan Tehan expressed similar concerns following the tariff increase. He addressed Beijing's pattern of behavior and said wine exports will now become part of ongoing dialogue with Beijing. A document was leaked to Australian media last week. It listed the CCP's grievances with Australia, from its ban on Chinese telecom giant Huawei to its call for an independent investigation into the origins of the virus outbreak in Wuhan. The Australian government placed a ban on Huawei's involvement in the country's 5G infrastructure in 2017. Since then, the CCP has constantly raised trade issues related to Australia's products. They are believed to be coercive economic measures aimed at pressuring Australia.
President Trump is once again turning up the heat on China. Reuters sources say he's set to add at least 2 more major Chinese companies to a blacklist of firms allegedly owned or controlled by the Chinese military.
Reuters reports the Trump administration will blacklist China's top chip maker SMIC and its largest offshore oil and gas producer SNOOC. The blacklist includes companies that are allegedly tied to the Chinese military. The Trump administration views SNOOC's deep-sea drilling in the South China Sea as a military operation. The blacklist means they will have little access to US investors and will be restricted from buying a range of US goods and technology. It's not known when these companies will be added to the Federal Register. Earlier in November, the White House published an executive order prohibiting US investors from buying securities of companies it has blacklisted. The ban starts this time next year. It's all part of a broader effort by Washington to target what it sees as Beijing's efforts to use emerging tech for military purposes. Shares in SNOOC fell by almost 14% after the report. The company says it hasn't received any formal notice from US authorities. Chip maker SMIC issued a statement saying it only makes products for civilian or commercial use. Its shares dropped by nearly 3% on Monday. Congress and the administration have sought increasingly to curb Chinese companies that don't comply with American rules from accessing the US market.
And that's all for our midday update, but stay with us for more live coverage of the Senate hearing in Michigan looking into election issues there. Until next time, I'm Jasmina Davis.